As the race in Georgia remains too close to call, the Secretary of State says the vote will head to a recount. Here's a look at the latest numbers in the state. Joe Biden leads by a narrow margin, but the votes are still being counted. Here's what Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger said at a press conference this morning as we await those results.
As we are closing in on a final count, we can begin to look toward our next steps. With a margin that small, there will be a recount in Georgia.
And for more on this, I want to bring in CBS News campaign reporter LaCrai Mitchell. Hi, LaCrai. Good to see you. So what are you hearing about this recount? When is it expected to begin, and what sort of impact could it have?
Earlier today, there was a press conference held around 11:30 with the Secretary of State's office. And when asked about timing, it was clear that they are still working to get us the tick-tock of how it would go down. I will say that we do know that with the recount, because this margin is so small, it would entail rescanning these ballots. And so there is a presser this afternoon, and we're hoping to get more details on nailing down that timing of how it would go. But obviously this is significant news in sort of this saga that we have now of the ongoing results coming in after Election Day here, and we'll continue to monitor this as well with this recount.
Right. Now, of course, as the information about the recount goes forward and you learn, how that's going to play out, the ballot counting continues, correct? When can we expect to know those results of the first count?
So earlier today, during that same press conference, there was still over 4,000 ballots that still needed to be counted, and that was not including the more than 8,000 ballots that were requested by military voters. And those, as long as they were postmarked by Election Day, can still be received up until 5 p.m. today. And so we don't know how many of those we're going to receive back, but of the 4,000 plus that were still left, the official at the press conference today said that he was hopeful that those would get counted by the later today or tonight. And again, like I said, there is that press conference in a little while where I'm sure we're going to get a bit more guidance on timing for that as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, those are interesting numbers, because that 4,000 plus those potential overseas votes coming in, there's enough there to change the race. So certainly this is not a done deal yet, in any stretch of the imagination. But I want to talk about the dynamics at play in this election, particularly, LaCrai, because Georgia has not voted for a Democrat since Bill Clinton in 1992. How significant would this be for Biden to win the state? And tell us a little bit about the sort of massive voter registration and sort of first-time voter campaigns that they were running across Georgia.
That's a great question, because it really is a case study in what has been going on in the ground in this state that has now led to such a significant shift. And I circled back with some of my sources on the ground today that are in some of these progressive groups that have been on the ground working. And I had one person tell me today that this was not a bit of luck. This was the effort and the results of years-long work that had been done on the ground by some of these groups that were working to mobilize voters, working to make sure that those voters felt like they were empowered to get out and turn out. And that's what we saw this time around, a huge turnout in the state. The other thing is, we've been looking at this heading into the election, the impact of what some of these big city centers, these Democratic city centers like Metro Atlanta, have on the surrounding suburbs that had traditionally been more Republican. And I think of Gwinnett County. I spoke with, a few weeks ago, I spoke with the woman who was the first woman Secretary of State in Georgia. And she said to me at the time, if a Democrat was going to win in the state, they were going to have to perform well in Gwinnett County. And there are a few other of those surrounding counties outside of Atlanta that political science professors have been telling me for months now, if there was going to be a change, look in those areas and see what that impact has been. And I will say, we started to see it in 2018. You know, the margin by which Stacey Abrams lost the gubernatorial race was small. And that, I would say that the groups that have been on the ground, they've been telling me that they've pushed through, they've worked through that, they've continued to work. Like I said, this is a years-long effort of working to really mobilize and empower voters on the ground. And they would say that this latest Biden leading in this state is proof that their efforts have been successful.
Yeah, it's for sure that Abrams' campaign and her race is getting credit or taking a lot of credit for some of the numbers that we're seeing for Democrats here. But LaCrai, I want to dive into the remaining votes. You say that there's 4,000 votes still to be counted. That's not, that's discounting the overseas military votes, that they don't know how many of those might still come in. But if we look at those 4,000 votes, can you tell us from which counties those are coming in from?
I do know that there were a few counties named earlier this morning in that presser. And I do remember off the top of my head that one of those counties was Gwinnett. And I remember because even before that announcement, Gwinnett still had a lot of uncounted votes in that total number that was still outstanding. And again, if I could just reiterate, and I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but it is worth noting, that is a county where, as these different results started coming in, even early last night, even as Biden took the lead, we were looking to see which counties were really boosting that for him. Gwinnett County, Fulton County, Clayton County last night, the Democratic county that ended up boosting him over. These were Democratic strongholds that we were seeing still had outstanding ballots. And there was a good chance that once those started getting tallied, they were going to be in favor for former Vice President Biden. That we have now seen play out, and we think we're going to continue to see it play out as Gwinnett goes back and gets those ballots counted, because what I didn't mention this time around is that Gwinnett did provide some election results on election night, but they had to go back and perform the adjudication review for some of those ballots, and they had an issue with the corrupt card for a machine, so they had to rescan those, and that's what we're waiting on now, the rescanning of those ballots to make sure that that tally is correct.
All right. Well, LaCrai Mitchell, thank you so much for your Georgia analysis. Great job. We appreciate it.
Thank you.